So hi YouTube, this is Multi Craftsman here. Sometime back my wife asked me if I would build a toy box for one of her grandchildren, and I thought about it for a while and started looking at some different plans for some different boxes, and I finally decided that I really like the looks of this steamer trunk, and it can also be called a toy box just as easy as a steamer trunk, and I told her I would build this one. So she liked it, and I set about to build it. I ordered a set of plans from Rockler. I think this is one of their boxes. And I converted it just a little bit. We moved the center lock and put a name there in the bottom. The grandchild's name is Charlie. It's a girl, but it's spelled the way I have it on the box. And I did not make a video. I was not into videoing at that time. I did take a few still pictures that I have here. I did make a few videos later on when I did get a camera. It took a little bit longer to do, and I did not make a video out of it, but now that I have a few pictures and a few camera videos, I thought, well, maybe I can just go ahead and throw together what I have and somehow or another pull out a video, because there's a lot of people interested in building this steamer trunk because it's really a very nice box, and they was extremely happy with it when I presented it to them. So I'm going to show how I went about it as the best I can. Not too long ago, my wife decided that she wanted to give her newest grandbaby a toy box for Christmas. So guess what? It gets to be my job to build a toy box. I kind of thought that this might be a little premature since the grandbaby is really not quite a year old, which is a little early for toys. But then I thought about it, and while the baby is still young, I'm not. And if I don't build something maybe right now, then I might not be able to build anything later. So I'm going to go ahead and get on with it, and I'm going to build a what is called a seaman's chest. You can see these plans on the internet, kind of a nice looking chest. And I have built these, and they're assembled now, but they're not glued, they're just sitting in place. And you see the side here under the bottom, they got rails with plywood in between, and this is going to be an end rail. The rail and the plywood, and this rail here is being made at this very moment. So I was not into video and the YouTube when I cut these pieces and put them together, and I moved everything over here and let it set for a while so anyway, I'm back on the box. I just thought I would show this project right here. I cut the end tenons. I can't put it on because I got something else. This is an old Delta tenon jig I've had for years. I never liked cutting tenons very much, mortise and tenon, so it never saw much use. But for this purpose, I cut the end of these boards using this jig. The reason was the plans call for using 1/4 inch plywood. Well, in the days gone by, most plywood was made here in Mississippi, and it was 1/4-inch plywood. Well, nowadays they have exported all the plywood jobs to China, and now 1/4-inch plywood measures out about 200 thousandths thick. I have router bits, they're 1/4. I have 3 dado blades, and the thinnest that any of those will cut is 1/4. Well, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to know that if you put a 200 thousandths wide board into a 1/4-inch slot, you got about a 50 thousandths gap there, and it's a little too much for me. I don't want that wiggle. So it's back to how I used to have to do it before I had anything, and that was the saw blade, and you make multiple passes until you get it down thick. You call it kind of sneaking up. And here I cut this down to just a hair over 200 thousandths. And now, if you can see, there's a little bit of a gap now while I'm running it along the rail and cutting a little bit off at a time until I get it down to the right thickness, which I like about one more cut to have it matched up with the ends. And this is going to be one of the top rails on the end. And that's where I stand right now. I just thought I'd go ahead and, even though I didn't actually film any of the beginning of it, I thought I would just go ahead and show this little bit to anyone that may be interested, and show a little bit of the project as it goes on. That's it for today. Thank you. One of the things you're faced with when trying to make accurate miter joints is accuracy. You have these dials here on the table saw that point to the degrees, and that's totally useless. Sometimes you can use things like these little cubes here. Those little cubes will get you in the ballpark. But no matter how accurate they say they are, they're not accurate either. The only accurate way of making truly tight-fitting, multi-sided miters is to use test pieces. And I'm going to show how I set mine up to get an accurate 45. It's really, you make your best shot, which is a test, and then you adjust. And I'm going to show how I make those adjustments. Okay, I put the angle device on there. Okay, I just took the box down and I set it on a little stool where I could brush on some sanding sealer on the end. So this is the end of the box. I've already brushed sanding sealer on the sides, and now it's time to do the ends. Now when this one dries, and give it 2 or 3 hours, and I'll flip it and do the other side. So this is where I'm standing with the box at this very moment. Okay, here's an update on my I can't ever remember the name of this box. I keep calling it a Siemens trunk, but it's a trunk, but it's another name. But anyway, I cut a couple of runners out of a board that I had, and I did also cut a couple of ends right here. And while I was cutting the ends and marked it off, I just happened to really realize one thing, that a lot of people that build things like this, and this is a curved surface on the top, and which makes it a little bit harder to work with. A lot of people do not want to work with curved surfaces. As you can see, I've taped both of them together. A lot of people use double-sided tape and stick them together. Nothing wrong with that. I just didn't have any double-sided tape at the time, so I would just pull some tape over there. But one of the things that you have to be aware of is you have to have a lineup, which in this case is the bottom here. Since it has to be perfectly flat, it's real easy to lay it on the table saw and bring both pieces down to flat and level. That's not a problem. And then you can tape them, and I'm looking for a square. I had one laying here somewhere, yeah. But one of the most important things is that you have to be square across the top. If you're not square, this thing zoom in. If you're not square across the top, then you're going to end up with some gaps. That won't look good on the whenever you raise the trunk up. And one of the hardest things is getting both pieces square across the top, because usually you got to bring it down to a mark, and my mark is not precisely, it's laid off with a curved piece, even though I had a basic template to start. But when I get a curve that looks pleasing, that's good enough. Somebody just draw a curve on the plans. Any good curve would do, but mine's within about a 64th of an inch. It's almost dead on the line all the way across, maybe just a hair off, both ends exactly the same. But it's hard to get it square. I've got a bunch of ways that I started with. Naturally, I put it on a belt sander and brought it down real close, real quick, but it was off a little, some way or the other. Scraper. This old cheap scraper. They're much cheaper than buying cabinet scrapers, and the steel's very hard and they work very good. So yeah, a scraper, you can bring it across the top and peel some wood off the top, and it levels it up pretty quick. That is, if you hold in the square, the scraper square. So again, you have the problem. Probably the best way, one that I haven't used that I'm going to, is a sanding blade. I happen to remember I have a sanding blade here for my table saw, and I would have used it because this is perfect. You can put the sanding blade on the blade for the saw. You can lay the flat edge down on the table saw here, and the edges will be square. If you leave them taped together, you can do both of them at the same time. They'll both be perfectly matched, which is the right way to go about it. This is the best way, but I did not have a pressure sensitive piece of sanding disc, so I didn't use that. Well, using scrapers and a homemade device right here. This is a sanding block. It has a back here, just tacked to it in a couple of spots with a staple. Now I can lay my sanding block here on this, and then use this sanding block, and this will hold a good square edge. And now this is how I squared mine up, and it works very well. It's a lot more work than the disc would be if you put the disc on and sanded it. But I like the results. This one's square, but I have several more of the internal pieces that I'm going to have to do the same thing to. and I don't want to hand sand all of those down level, so I'm probably just gonna bite the bullet and run to the hardware store and buy a pressure sensitive piece of sandpaper. And I just thought I'd bring that up for anyone that might be interested. This is a picture of the lid supports. You can notice that they have two curves, an inner curve and an outer curve. And the outer curve is fairly easy to bring in close using the sanding blade on the table saw. The inner curve doesn't work very good with flat blades, and I brought it down using the round tube type sanding drum hooked to the drill press. You know, I like to bring two of them together like this and tape them, fasten them so that I can work them down and be exactly the same. I only have enough wood at this very moment to do these two, and I'm going to need about 3 more. And this is the outside curve. But basically, I mark them. I lay them out, I put a line on them. You can see part of the line still showing on the, and I use the drum sander or the blade sander or a belt sander or something, and I try to bring them down very close. Then I put them in a vise, clamp them down, and I use one of probably 3 devices. If it's off a good bit, I'll take the RO sander and just concentrate on that little area that's off, and it'll eat it off real quick. And I like to run the scraper over everything to get everything exactly flat. And to kind of smooth it up, I'll use the little old hand sander with I think I have about 120 grit sandpaper on it right at the moment. And of course at the moment I just have one little clamp holding it together, which is enough. When I put it in this clamp here and clamp it down, then it's held together. And that's where I stand at the moment. Thank you. Okay, this is the box, and I have the end pieces. I'm trying to wait until it focuses. End pieces cut to length. Set on the box. I like to dry fit everything, and the rails here. One of the things that you would look out for is to make sure that the corner here matches perfectly with the corner here. This is going to be beveled. If it was in a regular box 90-degree type of thing, it would be beveled to a 45, so it would be across. But because this is an angle and it has to match this angle perfectly, it's going to be some degree. The plans say 38, but we'll have to see if that works out perfectly or not. Usually I lay these things out. It gives a specific length in the plans, but I don't like to go by that, since every box actually turns out a little different. These ends here, these ends call for being 20 inches across, and I cut both of them 20 inches because one end is exactly 20 inch. The other one seems to be about a 64th shy, so I'm going to match it to the box. The measurement's not important. It's that you want everything to fit, because if it doesn't fit, it doesn't look right, and you always want everything to look right. So, you know, it's not a CNC cut object. This is a handmade box, and everything turns out to be a little bit different. It never comes out to be exactly the same as it should be. So even though when I was putting it together, of course I tried with make it 20 inches, but for some reason I end up about a 64th shy on this one. Not much, but it's enough that there would be a crack, and I don't want the crack, so I will cut about a 64th off of the one that I have for this side, and that will make it match up perfectly, and there'll be no crack. But okay, that's dry fitting. And of course the rail, I have oversized it, so it's sticking off over on one side. I'm going to cut it to match the exact length, even though the length is given in the plans. I always kind of rough cut it a little bit bigger than what the plans call for, and then I run it across on my minor square, and that way I can make sure both ends are trued up, and I can just bring it down to the exact right size. Okay, I'm about to cut a few more pieces on. These are cut a little bit oversized. They're supposed to be 34 and a half. I cut them 35 so that I can go back and remiter the end when they're a little bit more of a manageable size. 35 to about the mark. So this is not a critical cut, so it could be anywhere in the area, but I like putting a little clamp on them simply because it makes them stay up against the fence. I don't have to be real careful about it pulling away, but you don't put much pressure at all if you do, because it's got a little bit of a downward angle. It'll pick the end of the board up. Right now it's picking up maybe a 64th of an inch, but I'll hold it down. It just makes it stay square a whole lot better. A lot of times, if you don't have the best equipment in the world, you like to blame the equipment for making mistakes. And I have probably one of the worst rip fences in the world. About every third time I set it up, it's not square. That's pretty close. I don't mind it being off just a fraction pulled away, as long as it's not more than a fraction and it's not pushed in. If it's pushed in, it's going to make the wood burn, and then you're going to have to sand it out or run it on the joiner or planer or something to get that out. But I have learned to just live with a defective rip fence. Usually I will use this groove here as a very good indicator, and if it's not lined up properly, I'll take this hammer and whop it until it's here, and then once I do that, I back it off and then come back in again. Clamp it down, feel of it here and there, and right now it's good. So that's how I learned to work with something that's not the best in the world. I'd like to have another rip fence, but I'm on Social Security and it doesn't go very far, especially when you retire at 62. It's not much to begin with, and if you retire early, well, they cut about 25 or 30% off of it. That makes it even smaller. So I learned to live with this and work with the limitations. I try to learn to work with my limitations also. My memory is not what it used to be. A lot of times you see me struggling to remember what to call something. The remembrance of what the name of something is sometimes just flees me, and I just can't pull it up. So I try to learn to live with my limitations and the limitations of my equipment. So maybe if you're watching the video, maybe you'll just kind of overlook it. One thing, if you want to get serious about making good straight cuts, you have to start out with everything set good in the square. This little gauge on the saw is about completely worthless. And it has a little set screw that goes up and locks it into place, so that if you move it on an angle and you move it back, it goes back in the same place. But it's never true. So one thing you should always do is actually check that your blade is on a 90. Take a good machinist square. Most tri-squares are really very good. Even the cheap ones I found are pretty much on the money when it comes to the angles. I can't guarantee all of them are, but the ones that I have bought are. But you need to always start out by checking the square of the blade. Make sure you get between the teeth and not on the tooth, because the teeth usually, this is a carbide blade, it has a little projection on each side to cut a wider slot than the actual blade itself, so it protrudes out just a hair. So you want to get between the blades and make sure you got a good good setup here on the table. You're touching. You could be off a little bit on the insert. I make my own inserts. Plus I use some store-bought ones that I have. I try to make my own when I can. So the main thing is to get right on the blade and make sure that there are no gaps, no daylight shining through there. Another thing about how I set the height of the blade. Now, I don't set mine the way that a lot of professionals recommend that you set it. I can't really remember what they do recommend, but I have a pretty set rule that I like to set mine where these teeth are above my workpiece. In other words, the projections that's sticking out, I like for them to be just a little above the workpiece. Somewhere about like this. This is probably almost about 2.5 sticking up. That gives it a little height. Now there are times when I will raise the blade way up to make a cut, and it has a lot to do with the trajectory of the blade. See, at this point here the blade is usually coming straight at you, so if you have the blade down real low, that tooth is hitting the board straight on and knocking it back. When if the blade is up and it crosses over, when it hits the board, it's making a down stroke. So there are times when I will set it high, but then you have to be very leery of the blade. I don't have a guard on mine because I have to take it off so many times, and I just don't like it being on there. But you have to learn to work with it and work safely. And you can not have a guard. If you look at most of the videos, you see that people that work with these saws a lot don't have a guard. Someone will simply tell you they take it off for demonstration purposes, and I think they kind of exaggerate on that a lot, because most of them don't use a guard for some reason that I don't. It's usually in the way. It will usually mess up your piece, get in a bind one way or the other. Now, one thing I have seen that this saw does not have, that I just might try to see if I can create one sometime in the future, and I think it would be a good safety deal. That's one of these dividing blades, or I'm not sure exactly what they call it, that's behind the actual saw blade. Riving blades. I like those. I like the looks of it. That will keep the piece from closing back up. Might possibly prevent an injury of some kind. But mine didn't come with one, and it doesn't have one. I'm not even sure if I can or will ever have the time to do it, but it'll be something good to add on.